Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 522 of the Constructive Criticism Podcast. I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts, Abe Stein,
That's me.
and a man that was missed, Mason Clark.
What's up, boys? I like last week's episode. I'm happy to be back.
We missed you, man. We're glad to have you back. Did you have
I
fun?
like your shirt, Spencer. I did have fun.
You like my shirt?
Yeah, it says Big Duck for list. Oh, Big Duck energy. I like it less now that it has energy. I liked it better when it was just Big Duck.
I also like more when it was just a big duck and a big yellow rubber duck.
Yeah, it's just very funny as like a big duck.
Mason, we should go into merch. You know what? You should start a little pitch some shirts to Cedric.
Yeah.
See if we can bridge into the Coalesce brand.
Yeah, I love it. Big Duck, that's funny. But yeah, no, I had a good vacation. The anniversary, it was a good time and everything, and I'm excited to come back. And then Magic kind of got shaken up, and that's today's main topic.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the B&R announcement, kind of give our reactions, our thoughts. Before we do that, we want to give a shout out to our newest patron, Paul. Paul joined the $5 or more tier, giving him access to the Patreon question of the week, which we will be answering during our main topic today, as well as access to the Discord. So thank you so much, Paul. We want to make sure that we give a shout out to our newest patrons every single week. It always means the world to us, and so shout out to Paul this week. Before we dive into the topic, just want to mention our sponsor, Untapped.gg. You can head on over to the link in the show notes, whether you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you are. If you just click that link, sign up, we get a kickback, and it's really appreciated. And then don't forget to check out the swag store. I know that some people have been checking out the swag store. We really appreciate that, and excited to hopefully see some of that in the streets here in the near future. So heading over to the swag store. We have everything priced that we only get like a little bit for everything, just to make it as cheap as possible for the stuff. And yeah, let us know what you think. Let's go into this main topic though. We had kind of two articles that we're going to mention today. The first is the B&R announcement, and the second is an article by Michael Majors that we will get into. I don't want to bury the lead if you don't know what happened. I'm just going to go ahead and read off the changes to our formats. So Standard had no changes. Pioneer, Amalia, and Sorin were banned. Modern, Nadu and Grief were banned. Legacy, Grief was banned. And in Vintage, Urza Saga and Vexing Bubble were restricted. Probably won't get into Legacy or Vintage today, as you know, we're going to focus on the RCQ formats and the competitive formats for now. I'll just say, I think good riddance to Grief and Legacy. If you follow the format, you know that it has been pretty big menace, and the same thing of Urza Saga in Vintage.
I want to say really quickly, it's interesting. I watched the weekly MTG stream today, and one of the play designers mentioned that Grief had the highest all-time play rate of a non-Wasteland Brainstorm card at like 40-something%, which is interesting. Makes me wonder what Brainstorm and Wasteland's percentage is that we have to put the caveat that it is a non-Brainstorm or Wasteland card. But yeah, Grief sucks. Brainstorm's part of the format. Wasteland's part of the format. I'm happy. I like playing Legacy for fun. I play some like local events with that every now and again. And yeah, good riddance.
Yeah, I was watching Nat play Vintage not too long ago. And just like the number of Urza Saga decks and like just their power was just like a little too much. Especially like in a format where like Lurrus is legal. Alright, so should we start with the Modern first? It was the one that I think everybody knew was coming. But Mason, I wanted you to talk about the article by Michael Majors that was released alongside this ban announcement. What was this article about?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Modern ban, once again, was Nadu and Grief. And there was a lot of questions kind of going on about, like, what happened with Nadu in testing that we got the Nadu that the world did. And so Majors wrote an article on that, which is great, which means I don't have to ever talk about it. He did. But the long story short is that when I was there playtesting MH3 along with the other contractors, Nadu did not look like the Nadu that y'all had. It gave flash to all permanents, and if your opponent targeted it like would flip the top card of your deck and put, the lands into play and spells in your hand, much like normal Nadu. It was basically just a like Port of Calling-esque protect your creature combo-y card that honestly I thought was not going to do very well in Modern. After we left, that is when the team decided to make a change because of some feedback about Commander. and specifically that in Commander, this card was causing some issues. I don't know what those issues were exactly. It's not really mentioned in the article. My guess is that Flash for every player really slowed the games down, and maybe there's also some interaction that I'm not familiar with from playing Commander that was deemed a little too unfun, a little too unstrong, probably. And so they switched Nadu in that hopes, because when we had played Nadu, and I had played it, to be fair, it was not called Nadu at the time. It had a different name. The card just wasn't really that big a deal. And he missed the interactions of targeting it yourself, and in the hopes of creating maybe a more appealing card for both Commander and probably Modern to some extent, accidentally created, one of the best Modern decks of all time, which, basically killed the format for a small period of time. He talked about that pretty openly and talked about sort of the ways that the company plans to move forward to try to remedy those problems that occurred with the Nadu and sort of the lessons they had. And I mean, I'll say it first. I think the article idea is great to do. I think Majors has gotten a lot of crap from the article and admitting and being open and honest. And we could have just not said anything. Like Majors could have been quiet. I know that I was not going to be the one to say that Nadu wasn't play tested. There's no way I was going to be the person to say that. I was hoping BBD or Brad would leak it so I could talk about it. But, jokes aside, just they could have gone by without it. And they decided to make an announcement to kind of show like, hey, we think this is a huge mistake and we want to learn from this in a show of good faith. Now, you can have a lot of opinions about that. And I think that there's a fair conversation to be had here about that. But changing the card is very normal. Lots of cards were changed at the last second with no testing done to them. The real problem with Nadu is kind of its wording and how much of a rework and how much stronger it is. I think had they, made the lands enter tapped and gave it another mana, for an example, we maybe would have the Nadu deck in some variation, but it would involve a lot more pieces like Amulet and stuff like that, be a harder deck to play. And they just didn't do that, and they're taking some lessons and growing from it. I just really quick before I hand off to y'all will say that there were other cards changed at the last second, both positively and negatively. And a bunch of those cards, especially the positive ones, are some cards I think players are some of the more fun cards. And they were buffed. So it's not all bad. In fact, one of the big changes, which I made a video on because they talked about on the Play MTG stream, is that originally the Bolt lands from Modern Horizons 3 were shocks. When I got there, and up until literally my last day there in the last couple hours, they would enter the battlefield untapped for 2 life instead of 3 life, which is a dramatic difference. I got some comments today being like, why would that even matter? I think if you've ever played with these Bolt lands, you can tell like how much 3 life matters compared to 2, and the ability to just splash them. My biggest fear, and I'll be honest, I was one of the people who led a very passionate, let's say, charge to get these changed, which led to a very long hour-plus discussion, was that I was afraid decks would stop playing lands, and or at least dramatically reduce lands. And this was a change that Majors and the team was receptive to once a conversation happened about, doing these things and getting some of them nerfed to be worse as well. And, I think Magic is for the better with these last-minute changes. So last-minute changes are not inherently bad. I want to talk about that. That is the article, though. I'm happy to talk to you all about it. I've talked a bunch.
Yeah, I think that the point of this podcast, right, is we always talk about always improving and what that means. And the only way that you can be #always improving is by owning up and like being honest and about your mistakes and why they happened, what happened, so that you can make a plan to move forward and address them, right? And so to me, this is their way of really doing that. Like, I see nothing negative about saying like, here's what happened, here's why it happened, we're gonna fix it moving forward. And honestly, the transparency is cool. Like I thought it was really well written, really honest. I'm happy to not a good band. I think that there's a different question to be had about product design from like a product perspective that like we don't really need to get into on this podcast. But like I do think that I can see from a marketing and from a sales perspective why you would put Commander cards in every product, right? I don't think that you need to do that to get commander players to be excited about a product, though. I think that they just get excited, and that's kind of the cool part of Commander. But that's just me. Anyway,
I guess I do want to talk about that a little bit really quick because I was like in the room for some of these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a pretty big mischaracterization. I think this is also one of the problems with WotC's approach of talking a little bit about a lot of things. But so one of the big things is like they talk about how MH is like a commander set. It's like a big piece of feedback from the community. They're like, oh, we hate this. And then when the Nadu article comes out, it mentions kind of pivoting Nadu to be a commander card, right? And I think that's actually really good because every card should kind of have a goal, right? Now, your goal could be like to be a modern role player. It could be a cool build around. It could be to be a joke. We have joke cards in MH3 where the whole point of the card is kind of does something unlimited and tells a joke, you know? And honestly, to me, those are kind of bigger things to complain about than commander targeted cards. But I think also because you all only see this little slice, you don't see all the times where we said no to commander or we said like, no, like this needs to happen for modern. And there were a bunch of times where basically we got some feedback and we pushed back on them. And we're like, no, this needs to happen this way for modern. And modern was like the main serving point. However, like I just mentioned, if you read the original Nadu card, it was probably a 0 to a 1 in modern and wasn't going to land. So having it be a pivot towards commander after testing it makes a lot of sense because it's like, well, I can't change this totally, right? Because that's literally what everyone's telling us not to do. And how Loki ended up with Nadu was we changed too much. So Majors tried to salvage the card. And there were commander cards that were released with the release of MH3, but those were all done by the commander teams, you know, with some amount of Majors overlapping being the product lead. And so like the set was designed for modern in mind and basically had no concessions for commander. So when I read online that this happened, it's frustrating because I understand where people are coming from with the release of MH3 commander sets and commander decks and the release of the Nadu article where it mentions commander. But I just want you to know, as someone who was in the room, that there were a lot of times where we were like, no, this is for modern. This needs to happen for modern. Commander can deal with it. Like, it's going to not be the end of the world. We're vetoing this change. And did that a lot.
It's probably a conversation that came up about Legacy too, right? Where you're like, oh, this card's gonna...
Yeah, I mean, to be transparent, wanted somebody to give a piece of feedback to us about Necro Dominance to Stronger Dark Ritual, and I kind of laughed. I'm like, yeah, black is good with Dark Ritual. I'm not designing cards to be bad with Dark Ritual, you know? And so it just is a thing, you know? So I don't know. Babe, you want to talk about something?
I think also it's just worth like consideration that, and I mean, for a long time I've been pretty vocally, you know, in the camp of like commander design principles have done harm to like the shape of, you know, just the shape of Magic products as they come out since Commander started being a target of, you know, of Wizards, for better or for worse. But I think that you have to acknowledge that, right, like to your point, Mason, the card as it was designed was not really for anyone, and it was going to be a legendary creature in popular Commander colors that presented probably similar problems to cards like Prophet of Grufix, which are on the ban list, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Like, all of your stuff having flash is just a miserable way to have to, like, play multiplayer Magic, because then people are either monopolizing time or have too many options. Like, that is a valid concern for a card that, you know, otherwise doesn't have a reason to have that text on it. You know, if you're already feeling like it's missing the mark. So I think that people are really, really quick to point the finger, but if you thought about it inversely, like, if they printed a card that was like, oh yeah, deal 15 damage for like 4 mana, because that's acceptable in Commander where you start at like 30 life, and, you know, maybe it's red, okay, that's a ridiculous idea, right? Like, no one would want that card to see print in any format that people play that is maybe not Commander, right? Like, that would be too much. And for the same thing, I'm sure happens frequently. Maybe not to that like plain a degree, but I'm sure the same kind of thing happens internally frequently. And like, it's the consideration of what a card looks like in Commander is just kind of a consideration of what the card looks like on a table. Like when people are playing with the card outside of 60 card tournaments and on Magic Online, how a card looks is important, and how it works is important. I think it matters in limited environment too. Like all those things are all pretty intertwined, and there's danger in only having a single perspective. So,
yep.
Let's talk about kind of our thoughts on the bans, though. Kind of get away from the philosophy as much as like what actually happened.
Armchair game dev, all what it is.
Exactly.
Game design.
It's so easy to be the armchair guy. I'll go first, and I'd love your guys' thoughts. I think that in our Discord, I had posted a wish list of what I wanted the bans to be. Basin, you posted one on Twitter as well. And I didn't get everything I wanted, but, I think that Grief getting banned in Modern, it's funny, people are complaining about that one. They're like, Grief doesn't even see a lot of play right now. It's like, well, I don't know. Like, it's just not fun, so it doesn't matter. The thing that surprised me was the mentioning that there was not a one-ring deck dominating the format, when there are like 6 one-ring decks dominating the format. So that was weird. But I think that we all knew. I'm really glad that they took the approach to just chop the head off of Nadu. And I think that Grief is a miserable play experience. I'm a little sad for people like the Gorios players, because I do think that that's a cool Grief deck.
They're a Thundertrap trainer deck now, baby.
Yeah.
Let's go. Otters.
I would rather play, and this kind of is my whole feeling on the ban, is I'd rather play like a tournament in which most of my matches contain my opponent playing Grief in their deck than most of my opponents playing the One Ring in their deck.
I knew you were going to say this.
Yep.
It's just the truth. It's just how I feel. Of course I'm going to say it. Like, I don't know. I've played way more interesting games that involve getting turn 1 double griefed than had perfectly interesting games ruined by a One Ring. And I also found it very interesting that the article said, oh, well, there are like 6 different One Ring decks, so it's hard to. And it's like that is not the flex you think it is.
It's not
this
better.
Is not.
It's not better.
It's actually worse. It's like okay, we're not going to touch Treasure Cruise because not every deck is a Treasure Cruise deck. Like but every deck is a One Ring deck. We're talking about decks that are what we're talking about white red energy just playing 2 to 3 rings. It's like, well, what else are we going to do? Like, no, the card's too good. It's best in class at everything. It slices and dices. I'm taking it over Jason Vintage Cube for like a whole year and a half now. Like, what are we doing? Anyway.
I gotta make the Chidi Atagonia meme where he's like, you see how that's worse, right?
it for me, it was the I think you should leave. Oh my God, he admitted. Like they admit it's a problem. It's the card that 6 different decks rely on for card advantage. And it's the only way, like, there's no other point in trying to do anything else with the card. Or in the same lane as the card. Which is really, really egregiously miserable and plays into people being tired of cards like Orcish Bowmasters. Where, like, you're like, oh, I can't play 1 toughest creatures, because now Bowmasters, and before it was, like, just Wrenn and 6, but now you just get ambushed by Bowmasters. Because you can justify playing it because people are drawing 1,000 cards. Yeah, so I'm not happy about that. But at least... But at least we're a step closer. I wasn't really happy about Grief being in the format in the first place. Honestly, I think that was one where, like, I think the pitch elementals, specifically Grief and Solitude, are, like, outliers in terms of power level. Fury, I guess, also was, even though as someone who played decks that were simple Fury, I didn't really care all too much about that card. But in general, the pitch elementals are like power outliers themselves. Grief especially is miserable when it happens so many times so early at low card costs. That's all good for the format, but I think I would be surprised if by December when they said they're doing their next ban announcement, we don't see more people talking about the One Ring, or was it being kind of evident that the One Ring needs to go because it is just the best thing. Like Necrodominance doesn't even have space in the format because of that card.
I think that what's interesting about the Grief ban too is if they had just banned Grief in the first place instead of Fury, then we wouldn't be in a spot where it looks weird that Grief is banned. Right? Like,
yeah, I don't even know if it looks weird. I think it is. I'm going to be kind of rude this episode. I think it's really short-sighted because it's like Grief was really good until the release of MH3.
Right.
And then Nadu and Flage came out. And it was like, people early on were like, Flage kind of dunks on Grief. And then people were like, well, Nadu definitely dunks on Grief. And so when the best deck in the format is like a generational problem, it's like, yeah, you're not going to play the card that's weak against it.
Yeah,
obviously. It's like, what do you think was happening before MH2 came out? Before MH3 came out? I'll tell you, I was winning with awful black decks playing Grief. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy talk. Like, listen, Grief currently was at a low. Would you like to risk unbanning Grief, not banning the One Ring because they, for some idiotic reason, think it's not a big part of the format, and then like just have Nadu? It's so dumb.
They said it's a big part of the format. That's the thing that makes me most upset.
That's not what it says, though. That's not what it says.
Too big to fail, Mason.
It says
too big to fail.
Just to be clear,
it doesn't say it's too big. Yeah,
it says it's a strong card that helps pop up several varied strategies.
Yeah, while present in several decks, there is no clear the One Ring deck terrorizing Modern.
Yes,
I would argue it's terrorizing from lots of decks. Like,
yeah, that's a bigger problem to me. That there's not one deck that is abusing this card extremely, because every deck is abusing it by putting it in there and activating it over and over again. It's the only, you just play the card. It's the only. I need to lower myself to register.
Here's what I have. You can answer that the One Ring has a lot of counterplay, theoretically, right? Like you'll pick your poison, we give you Consign the Memory in MH3, you have all the normal counter spells, you have Orcish Bowmaster. There's a lot of things that can stop it. It's a 4-mana card that, technically doesn't impact the board. I personally disagree a little bit, but whatever. It is a big card. And I think there is some logic to maybe we should let this see traditionally. However, I really have to ask the question of is this a card you want to balance your format around? Is this the thing you want to be the ultimate top end? If you want to do that, then that's fine and you can run the experiment. But don't tell me it's because there's not one deck, so I wasn't sure if it was good. Every deck was playing it. They weren't playing Grief or Nadu, or sometimes they were playing the One Ring and this. It's just, and honestly, they sound like idiots when they talk on their stream and they say oh, it's fun to play against the One Ring. They said on the stream today, it is one of the more fun experiences to play against the One Ring. I don't know about you, Spencer, but when I play chess, and at the end of the game, we roll a little dice, and if I roll a 1, I win the chess game, and it undoes all the decisions that happened earlier. That's not fun to me. I hate the One Ring. I don't want to play a format with the One Ring. I'll try. I'll do it or whatever for a little bit, but if it's not fun in a month or two, I'm out. I can do other things with my time. Wizards has lost all trust in me after I knew and they knew that Nadu wasn't tested and they didn't ban it sooner. My tolerance for Wizard is at below, rock bottom. We both knew that Nadu wasn't tested and they were just we're going to leave it for a little bit. We think it's fine. It's causing all these issues, blah, blah, blah. It's so stupid. And this One Ring stuff is exactly the same. It's so infuriating. It makes me so mad.
I do have to just second that I've had more people in my play group who are the One Ring is the most miserable card, and are part of their favorite thing about playing the Modern format during Nadu was that fewer people were playing the One Ring decks, so they could so they could avoid it. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that to your frustration, Mason, it is a pretty miserable place to be. That it's just the thing that matters.
I don't think that Lord of the Rings being in Modern was well received. Even more than that, I think that banning the One Ring to rule them all is a bad look for the set Lord of the Rings. And so they're trying to avoid it. But I don't know. I'm not in the room.
The worst thing is, there's never going to be a better time to admit it than yesterday.
That's why I thought it would happen. Like, when I put on my wish list, I was like, the One Ring. I just assumed, like, if we were getting grief, we were probably getting the One Ring too.
You get to just... They would have just gotten to wash their hands of... Like, Michael Mayer's writing an article about Nadu.
Oh my gosh.
We don't have to
it would
talk
have been
about
the
the One
whole
Ring.
thing.
We don't
It
have
would
to
have
talk
been the whole
about grief.
thing.
We're just still talking about Nadu. Now you're going to have to wait until what? The next Boogeyman shows up? Or you're going to have to wind up dealing with the One Ring.
So
in either sense, I think that Modern is just in... I mean, I think it's in a much better place now than it was before the bans, for obvious reasons. I think it just still has some room to improve. But I also think that, you know, I would be surprised if we've seen everything Modern Horizons 3 has to offer in terms of, like, high power level stuff. And, you know, letting the One Ring coexist with that while it all shakes out is not the absolute worst idea I've ever heard. It's just like, if we don't get action on this in December and it's still the same kind of environment it has been, I don't know what to think other than it's become the brainstorm wasteland level of what's the play rate on that card, where it's just like on its own little part of the Excel sheet there where no one is allowed to look at it. And I don't know. It just seems pretty bad for...
All right.
We
have to end the One Ring conversation now, because, like, this is too long.
No more ring. We're all done.
Yeah, let's end the One Ring conversation. Let's talk about what matters in Modern for the next section. So you should probably play the One Ring deck.
So
one of six.
Yeah, you have a lot of options. And for the mere price of $400, you can start to build any other deck you want. But no, unironically, I am kind of like, what deck can I play that is the One Ring deck, or a deck that actually, like, abuses the fact that my opponent's tapping out for 4 mana? And that is, like, kind of the guiding light right now. Energy, coming into the BNR announcement, is sort of everyone's de facto pick for the best deck early on because it was so good versus Nadu. I'm a big believer that metagames are, like, ecosystems. You know, like, if Nadu was the lion and the gazelle was energy, you know, like, maybe it's going to flourish now the lion's gone.
Reversed, right?
Well, the Nadu would beat the energy deck, right? And then now that its predator's gone, the gazelles would grow.
Got it.
But what if, because the lion was around, this other animal didn't hunt the gazelle? That's better. And that's kind of where I am, where I believe energy is probably a very good deck. It's very strong, has a very cohesive core engine. I'm curious to see, how does it handle the Yogg deck? You know, we've seen some Yawgmoth one tricks who are very good, like Control for Days and Meet MTG, both put up challenged wins and top 8s during the Nadu era, predominantly off the back of farming against energy players. The energy players weren't sideboarding for the Yogg decks. Will that continue? Time will tell. But yeah, I don't know how y'all feel. Like, I'm really interested in One Ring decks and Bowmaster decks, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think that, like, when I think about Modern, and we'll get into this in our Patreon only episode this week when we talk about what we play and why. But I do think that, like, there are going to be new rules of engagement. Those rules of engagement are going to involve the One Ring. They're probably going to involve, like, energy control and maybe Tron to start out with, at least, which is still like a One Ring deck. I mean, they're all One Ring decks, let's be honest. But I think about, like, the people that got hurt the most in a lot of ways were, like, the people that were circumventing grief and Nadu. You know, I haven't played enough Modern recently to really know who it was. I kind of took a lot of this off, but, like, you know, it's possible that decks like, I don't know, like maybe Mill gets worse. I don't know. I don't know. But
I mean, with all those cards people are drawing, I think that, like, the format moves forward, like, much to what you're saying, even Mason. Like, there's a lot of room for things to change. I think that the rules of engagement of the format have obviously changed with Nadu not being around, and decks that, you know, no longer have to play by the constraint of, like, you know, be able to beat Nadu kind of get freed up more. Like, and I think conversely, decks that are really good at playing by the rules of, okay, let's be able to beat Nadu, those kind of fall back a bit. Like, I think the format does not need to be nearly as fast without Nadu in it, which means that, you know, some of the emphasis put on, I mean, things like Through the Breach decks being really good, or like, even like Boros to an extent, like being really fast to the board, don't have to necessarily be the way that the format is being played. And I think that instead leaning into whatever the next most powerful things are, I think like the Eldrazi decks are very good. They get to be some of the best at, and always have been able to be the best at, using a bunch of mana and a bunch of cards for the One Ring's nefarious purposes. And like, they also get to play a lot of the really appealing stuff if people start to gravitate towards the low mana value threat and interaction decks like Murktide or like Boros Energy, to just be able to play some of the stronger hosers in that, in terms of like, chalices and big creatures. So
do you guys feel like this hurts decks like Jeskai and like Murktide, that are like these decks that care about the metagame and what's going on in it, that they'll have to readjust, whereas decks like Tron probably just get a jam and figure it out from there?
I'd say that's probably always the case in the short term. Like, I don't know how you feel about that, but I think the decks that are just really right, they're not interested necessarily in what's going on around them for them to be powerful, right? They're not built around their interactive pieces, they're built around their threats. Those are always easier to run out. I think that, like, giving some time for, especially for, like, I think Blue Black Murktide probably is the farthest to go to adapt. Even though I do think that the combination of, like, Frog, Bowmasters, Murktide, and, like, the interactive spells is all really good. Like, it takes time to figure out what that really looks like, whereas even Boros is kind of defined by its threat base a lot more than it's defined by anything else. So, I don't know how you feel about that, Mason.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think Tron kind of actually falls in the Jeskai camp, where like its Karn packages kind of matter on what it's hating. But yeah, I think decks that are proactive always benefit a little bit more in the early days of BNR, and the like answer decks need to line up accordingly. I think Wrath of Skies is still very strong. I don't think we're starting from zero here like we would when MH3 first came out. But I do think there are decks that are back on the menu. We talked about Yogg. We didn't really talk much about Amulet, but that's a deck that was pushed out because of Nadu. And, got a lot of really good cards in MH3, including things like Springheart and Nantuko, which opened up more infinites for the deck. Being able to put infinite Arboreal Grazers in play on turn, 2 is pretty good. It's just a hot take, but it's a take. And so I think that, we could see some really things change, and these decks like Murktide, like Jeskai, knowing what your answers need to be to fight those things is important. And part of why they've historically struggled in Modern was that they couldn't always line up perfectly. And in the more recent years, the answers have gotten so much better that you've been able to kind of overwhelm that in combination with things like the One Ring, and just kind of drown your opponent in cards.
Something really interesting that I just noticed was that MTGDecks.net has removed Nadu from their data for the last 30 days. And Dimir Murktide has a 58% win percentage once you do that, with its only major losing matchup, and it's 48%, so take that with a grain of salt, is Jeskai Energy Control. And then its first actual losing matchup with only 3 matches played is Domain Aggro, and everything else is 50 or above.
I'm dubious kind of all past data, just because Nadu booked things so much.
I just thought it was interesting.
It is interesting. I think the card Psychic Frog is good. So,
if you want to listen to us talk about what we would play moving forward in Modern, there is going to be our bonus episode this week. So check that out at patreon.com/ccmtg. Let's move on to Pioneer. All right, Abe. You didn't get what you wanted. We'll let you go first.
I mean, here we are again. We're cruising for a bruising. This is, I don't know. I can beat another dead horse here. Beat the same drum, but I think that these bans are good. I think that both of these cards are, I think both Amalia is in the camp of this clearly did not ship as they wanted it to. I think a lot of the weird stuff of establishing like Unbreakable Loops is bad. I think the resolving of comboing is kind of bad. Like there's just a lot to not be excited about in the play patterns of Amalia, and also it was uncharacteristically restrictive on being invested in the battlefield, while also being unreliant on being invested in the battlefield for a deck full of small creatures. And like that was kind of a frustrating constraint to have placed on things, and so I'm glad that's gone. I think that like Sorin plus Vein Ripper probably, I mean, I don't know. I think that it is a bit out of line in terms of how strong it was. Just like those draws were a little bit too good, felt a little bit unbeatable. And I think that overall it's just not, decks currently in Pioneer can't compete in terms of threat quality that fast with anything that was going on there. And let alone for that to be paired with the best interactive colors, I think that Rakdos Vampires was too good. I would have loved to see Treasure Cruise take a hit as well, but I do think that there have been more ways added to the format for people to kind of try to punish decks that use Treasure Cruise outside of just like the normal kind of graveyard hate angle or the, like kind of constraining the quality of what it is that the Phoenix deck does. But, also things like faster, aggressive decks with cards like Magebane Lizard really punishing high volumes of instant sorceries. I think that all those things give reason to...
It doesn't work. For what it's worth, I talked to Steve Rubin about this when I played against him at the SCG, and he asked me, he's like, "Do you not have Magebane Lizards?" I was like, "I don't board them in against Phoenix." And he's like, "Oh, why?" And I was like, "Because it deals more damage to me than it does to you, and then you just land one threat that's too big and I can't block you." And he's like, "I actually think you're right. I think that Magebane Lizard is actually not very good. And maybe other aggressive decks, it's better for specific matchups. But I did not think that Magebane Lizard answered the problem against Phoenix for Gruul specifically."
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that for Gruul versus for like, various builds of mono red. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But my point is more that like we have more and more of these cards that get printed that are trying to attack the problem from an angle that is not target the card Treasure Cruise. And I do think that it's been very clear and has been the whole time that there are certain things that are part of the identity of Pioneer to the people in charge of Pioneer at Wizards, for better or for worse, and that includes cards like Lotus Field and like Treasure Cruise. So
I agree with you, Abe. My want though would have been to like hit like Picklock Prankster. Like, even if we're saying like we're going to have Treasure Cruise in Pioneer, like this is part of the format's identity, we're gonna do it. Okay, whatever. Like we've all played Brainstorm like happily, right? Like we've all happily done it. Mason's like, I've never once happily played a Brainstorm. I forgot you made cantrips.
Man of the people.
But like, I don't know. I think that like hitting like Picklock Prankster could have brought the deck back down. Like that card enables that deck so much and makes it so much more consistent and so much better. And it wasn't even mentioned in their article. They mentioned Treasure Cruise, and then they mentioned Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, and I'm like, hold on. You're just like that's not the problem here. The problem here is that you've left the boogeyman that is the highest played deck at the RCQ level and at the RC level.
I think it might have gotten eclipsed by Vampires, but it is definitely one or two.
Yeah. Okay.
Vampires was like 40% near the end, according to the Carson data.
Either way, even if they were like, we don't want to remove Cruise, I think that they could have done something that says we want Phoenix to exist. We think it's a fun deck in the format. People love playing it. It's the only format where you can play Phoenix and Treasure Cruise, and we want that to continue with like, and still not let it have the world. I'm really happy with the Amalia ban. I think that deck was really miserable to play against. And I think that as much as I love playing Sorin Vein Ripper when I'm like trying to, just, grind some gold or packs on Arena or, play some stuff on MTGO, I do think that play pattern in a Thoughtseize deck was too good.
Yeah, if I can just say one, because I hear you in terms of like Picklock Prankster, but I think that's something that like is kind of good and bad about bans in Magic is that like a good thing that I think it was Gavin Verhey who said this once was just like the read the ban list check of like, is this a good ban or not? It might have been before his time even. It might have been like a Morrow article around like artifact lands, things like that, where it's like if someone opened up a pack of Wilds of Eldraine and saw a Picklock Prankster and then was like, oh, I'm gonna put this in my fairies deck, and then went up to a Pioneer tournament and then couldn't play Picklock Prankster, like that's a pretty big loss. And for a lot of reasons, a lot of like kind of downstream enablers that like did push a card even further towards its own danger, like Treasure Cruise, and with Picklock Prankster being so efficient with it and just being a very good card in the Phoenix deck in general. Those cards like Treasure Cruise, which are really powerful but have to be enabled to be that powerful, like it's tempting to feel like, oh, this would be such a good solution, but when you think about it in practice, those things just don't really work, unfortunately, because you deal with issues where people are like, why is this a card that's banned? It's like, well, it's very obviously to prop up the fact that we want Treasure Cruise over here to stay safe, and then you pat Treasure Cruise in the back and you sell it to go play on the playground and punch another kid in the arm. And it's like, it's just not, you kind of have to accept that it's as good as it is. And I don't know, I think that like I remain, at some point Treasure Cruise either gets way too good or everything else gets as good as Treasure Cruise. I think the Phoenix being the best deck and the most flexible deck and having the win rate it does is like not great. I'm not a fan of it. I think the deck is like pretty miserable and boring, but I haven't been playing Pioneer for a few months since the RSQ season ended. So, I'm kind of refreshed to it now. I'm sure by the time the RC comes and goes, I'll be tired of it. But it kind of is what it is, and I think that that's an okay place for Pioneer to be at because it's been, allowed to be a format where there's at least I know what it is that they want to balance around. And for now, that's Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, it's weird. They discuss potentially banning it. So it's not even like it seems like they want it to be a brainstorm level thing. It sounds like they're open to bans, but it also seems like they aren't confident. I don't know. There's maybe some amount of like, if we ban too much of this, players' confidence in the format, blah, 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 blah. We ban every deck. Like you could easily go down the line of like, well, if you ban this, then Nykthos becomes the best. And so why didn't they ban Nick? Something like that. I don't know. It seems really weird to me.
The Jerry T approach to the format, the like take out literally 11 cards.
Yeah, I think that's not the way I would go about things, but to each their own. I would have banned Treasure Cruise and just kind of seen what would have happened from there. But yeah, I think the good thing about this is that we've seen some decks can overpower Phoenix and can make it life awkward for them. We've seen Convoke do it in the past, and that deck got unbanned. Like could not beat Amalia, had a tough Vein Ripper matchup. We've seen the Gruul, Gruul Bushwhacker deck become a part of the Pioneer format. That seems to have like an okayish matchup as long as they don't go Letter Shredder. Mono green, if they don't play all the hate cards, it's like a fine-ish matchup. So there's a lot of different things going on. I'm happy to just play my green cards every time I'm at an RC level event and just call it a day. And there's some interesting things. We are kind of at this weird point where we're back to when the Karn ban happened and Copter got unbanned. Because at that time, it kind of hit like Appraiser into Amalia, into Sorin, and things kind of like never looked the same. And then we have that time period plus 4 sets. We have LCI with all the other cards that aren't those, Murders, OTJ, and the new one, Bloomburrow. And so there's a lot of different things going on Pioneer. I think it's interesting. I stand by it's still not my favorite format to play, but you know what? While I was gone, boys, I won a RCQ playing Pioneer Phoenix. So what can you say? It was 6 months old, had no cards for the current metagame, really.
Did you have to like actually dust off the sleeves?
So it was Niall's deck. She had it with her, and she had updated it from right after the Pro Tour MKM, and so that's sort of the situation I was in. And you know what? I had some crazy games, beat Control with some insane lines, and it was fun. And I hate playing Phoenix, so can't wait to do more.
I did know that about you. I did know. I think one of the things that like these bans do help though is green decks. To be honest, like obviously, like you could make an argument that Amalia's a green deck. I wouldn't, but like I think that like whether it's Gruul, whether it's Nykthos, things like that. I also think that some of the aggro decks, as Mason mentioned, get helped out here. Whether it's humans, whether it's Boros, there are things that like we can get back to talking about it, and I like that for the format. I know that one of the things that one of the people in our Discord was excited about because of Mason was like, "Ooh, is Trail of the Crumbs back?" It was like there. It certainly opens up the format when you don't have to worry about turn 3 Vein Ripper or dying on turn 3 or 4 to call Amalia.
Yeah, I think Amalia especially was just extremely offensive at saying like, okay, no, there's so many types of decks you cannot play because this monopolizes like power on the battlefield. Like, oh, you're gonna put creatures into play and try to attack me. I will wrath you and have a 20/20 and 60 life. Like, oh, you're gonna try to like play some bigger things or like go like decks like Angels or whatever that are I think some of people's favorite decks that existed in Pioneer. Some people just love to play their green-white piles of creatures that gain life in collected companies. Like that was something I know for a fact a lot of players near me just like. And it's like, well, you can't do that because if you're just spending your whole game putting creatures into play, I will just end the game. Like I will just blow you up. Or like I will not give you the time to do that. I think both these bans really support a healthier Pioneer format in terms of speed and what's allowed to happen in the format. And I think that overall is just good.
Yeah, I think they're good bans, and I know that people wanted to know about. People really hate Lotus Field and Nykthos, and they didn't really mention in the article. But I do think that if anything, we've seen that those decks can be beaten. Like you can do things to beat those cards and those strategies. So it makes the metagame healthy to have decks that can be really strong in certain metagames and then weak in others. I think that's actually a good thing, even though some people don't enjoy Nykthos and Hidden String or Lotus Field that much.
Yeah, the Treasure Cruise being dodged by the ban list is way less, or I should say is way more forgivable and not as offensive as like the One Ring.
Yeah.
It is not the same level. And, if we had fetch lands, maybe that'd be different. But we don't. That's not the world we live in. So we're going to have to see. And, Phoenix is a good deck. I'm curious to see how it adapts in the coming weeks and how players adapt against it.
So, yeah, I do. As long as they don't write another blurb of like, well, there's only 6 decks playing Treasure Cruise, I will always accept Treasure Cruise being left alone.
It's so funny, though, because you and I, one of our complaints is that only one deck gets to play Treasure Cruise, and that we would like it better if there were multiple decks that got to play it. But
I only say that from a philosophical standpoint. If you're going to say that it's like, a card not worth touching. Anyway.
I think Arclight Phoenix is just one of the most fun decks to be the best deck for a lot of players, even if I personally don't enjoy it. It's one of those spots where I can put myself in other players. I hear them talk about it. I can see where they're coming from. Not for me, but I can understand. And, like maybe the plan is like, hey, if this is still a problem in 6 months or 4 months, whatever it is, we'll have a discussion again about Treasure Cruise and maybe we'll hit it then. They mentioned 8 months ago they're going to take a heavier handed approach to Pioneer. So, maybe that's the plan. It just took a year to happen.
What, we're not, this week's Patreon episode is modern. So where are you guys starting a Pioneer if you were going to play a challenge or go to, a 10K or a 5K or something? Where would you guys start?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of answer Paul's Patreon question as well, of sort of saying, with the banning of Sword and Amalia and Pioneer, what do you leave to the best creature combo deck to take place of Amalia? Greasefang is pretty high up there on my wanting to test things. Yagra combo as well, which is the black green turns everything into a food card that combos with Cauldron Familiar. I want to try that in various forms, from black green to Jund to weird versions of like 5-colory stuff. Those are pretty high up on my list. Mono green's pretty high. And then I'm taking a big look at Ignamic Incarnation. The Duskmourn set is releasing for the RC and is an enchantment theme set. And as such, I am looking at the enchantment birthing pod to try and see like how that deck feels, so that if there's a card that looks kind of good in it, I can jump into there, not starting from zero. But I don't know how y'all feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go next. I love that answer. To jump on that Patreon question from Paul talking about creature combo decks. I don't know if this qualifies, but I've been working inappropriately hard at hardened scales in Pioneer with the Vraska talent combo. And it's been really fun. I'm winning quite a bit with it. And if we'll get into it during Arts Improving, but like it was one of my leading decks going into DC to test out and to try to make work.
So it's funny, Spencer. I had this like giant brain blast moment when I was like in the car and I was like, I'm gonna put talent and Vraska in my mono green deck, and I'm just gonna get them.
That could work for what it's worth.
Well, it's a lot better because in my mind on standard I always die on 5 mana to Vraska, and so I thought I could storm into it.
Oh.
And so and so I was like in the car, I was like, I've done it. I have the A plus B. I've got a combo. I was ready to message Abe. I go to get my draft and message Abe, and I'm like, wait, this thing's 6 mana. Oh no. But you just reminded me of that. And I don't know, maybe it's still good enough, like you said. But when it doesn't work with Storm, it's so much less clean. But I do think Hardened Scales is like a deck that's underplayed.
It does not work with Storm the Festival, that is.
Yeah.
That would be so crazy.
But yeah, Scales sounds really cool.
Yeah, so Scales is a deck that I've been working on. I think that I know that one of the decks that people really enjoy is Nibtolite. I do wonder if Nibtolite gets hurt in some ways by these bans. Well, kind of.
Nibtolite's just always do my kill spells line up well against you?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe they find the right interaction. And then, as always, I think that Gruul is such an interesting part of the Pioneer metagame. As people know, like, I'm a total Gruul lover. The fact that there are now 3 different iterations of Gruul that in the last calendar year have probably won a challenge is wild. Like, that's so weird. And I honestly have no idea if, like, I think at the beginning of this year, if you had told me like that the Chariot deck with oh my gosh, is it Huntmaster's
Redemption?
Is that the name of the card?
Redemption.
Yeah, and that stuff was just gonna be gone, and the deck would go to like a Burning Tree Emissary deck or like a Slickshot deck. There are so many versions of these Gruul aggressive decks. It's kind of hard to know where to go from here, and that's I literally just two months ago won a RCQ with Slickshot. That would be a place that I would look at, like, what lines up in the metagame. Is the metagame more about things like Chariot that were really good against Rakdos midrange and really good against Phoenix, whereas the Slickshot deck was really bad against Phoenix. Like, how do you do that? That's kind of where my head's at. And then obviously Mono Green, because that deck's sweet.
Yeah, I personally have some fears that Mono Green is going to struggle because of the lack of black-red mid-range decks, like, currently presenting themselves. Like, my prediction is over the next month or so, Phoenix will do very well. Some of the decks that are, known to be able to beat Phoenix efficiently will do pretty well. I think that the aggressive side of the format will come back pretty heavy. I'd be surprised if Convoke didn't start having some really good weeks, in addition to like decks like Ensoul coming back on the map a bit more. And then I think at some point somebody playing Thoughtseize is going to come back into the picture. I imagine the Thoughtseize and Fable is just going to be still a big part of the format in some capacity, but not having it was already a bit of a question mark of, is Rakdos able to do enough before Vane Ripper, and then Vane Ripper kind of like ate a bunch of the metagame share of Rakdos alive. And I think there's going to be a lot of sticker shock for a lot of Rakdos players who do not get handed as many of their best starts on a platter in the way that they did. And so it'll take some time, but I'd expect like kind of that to be the trajectory of things. Personally, I'll probably spend some time messing around with like the red aggressive decks for a bit, and then hope to get in the streets with green. I do just love playing the green deck. So
that is going to do it for our BNR. What we think. Make sure to check out the Patreon episode as we talk about Modern and our current RCQ format. Before we go, I just want to say this was different. Like, I don't think that we've had an episode like this in 6 years on CCMPG Plus, where we really just talk to each other and dive in on what we think. So if you like it, let us know. Like, leave a comment on Spotify, leave a comment on YouTube. Give us feedback. We're always about making the podcast to be the best and listenable. I appreciate the YouTube comments. It's fun to see our community grow and interact with us, and it really helps us when you let us know if you're like, hey, this was like so far of a departure, or oh man, this is really cool. I wish you guys did more episodes like this. So always improving is the point of the show, though. We always want to be better today than we were yesterday. And Mason, you were gone last week, so talk to us about your always improving moment.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier. I played a re-CQ at Apex Games on Sunday, which was Pioneer, and I won my invite for the RC, which is very funny because I won my Pioneer RC invite playing Modern, and my Pioneer RC playing reverse that. Sorry, Pioneer for Modern. But the always improving moment really came from kind of identifying what I could and couldn't do, because I mentioned earlier on the show I was borrowing my partner's deck, and she had like 6-month-old Phoenix, and we were able to make like a very small amount of changes before it fired, but there wasn't much time. It was limited cards. It's very much a last second type of thing. And the always improving moment really comes from like I'm playing against green in round 1, and I have no Aether Gusts, I have no Disdainful Strokes, I have no negates, I have nothing like that. When the deck was built, green had not re-entered the metagame, so she didn't have anything. And so I sideboarded the best I could. I brought in some extra Brazen Borrowers, and they were able to clear the way for Cavalier. And I played my game accordingly. I knew I couldn't play the type of game I would like to play against them. And even though I knew I had a suboptimal game plan, I still just played the way that my deck allowed me to play and was built to work against green as best I could. And ended up, having my opponent take a mulligan, use my Brazen Borrow that I sideboarded in to actually remove a Cavalier at a very clutch moment, and allowed me to push a little bit more damage, keeping very, very identic memory heavy hand, and was able to close it out before my green opponent really got going. And so that was my most improving moment. Really, like, sometimes you're not prepared for a matchup, and that makes the matchup a lot worse, and something that may even become favored for them, but it does not mean you're 0%. And you just need to do what makes the most sense to win in those spots. So that was my most improving moment.
I'm glad you're playing Profs. I think that card's going to be really good moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's been great and continues to, perform incredibly well every time I play it.
Dude, there are people that don't play it. I don't know.
Yeah, so my always improving moment this week comes actually from it's been the Vintage Cube in person feeder leagues and everything. Like, that has been a really, really big buzz in a lot of my play group. Trying to, qualify for 64-mans, trying to, win those to get the invites for Vegas. Like, it's been just a lot of energy around it. And so I haven't personally really been able to devote a lot of time to feeder leagues or anything, but I did want to kind of get involved in trying to help them succeed and find like good strategies, because I felt like as much as the group had been doing a good job of like identifying what the strong archetypes were, what the cube was really about, I feel like there's a lot of stones that I hadn't seen them like turning over. So for example, my mission I've been on for about 2 nights now is to draft a Hogak deck in the cube and like actually try to like build, like get into every single kind of package there could be, trying like Bazaar of Baghdad decks with, taking advantage of some of the late like Madness cards, like the more Bloodghast oriented builds, trying to like really just take a lot of value out of high priority late picks. And overall, it's kind of just been a different approach to practicing or testing than a lot of my playgroup is used to. And it's one that I haven't really, like, it's an exploratory way of testing I haven't really taken in a while, and definitely not in a long time in Limited. I think the last time I did anything like this in Limited was probably, I guess I did some of it for the Pro Tour for Murderers, of just like trying to draft an archetype to see how it's stacked up, or just trying to make something happen, even if the cards might not be there, to understand like how it would work. But just taking that a step further and applying it to a different kind of Limited tournament, and also just working within the constraints of what I have to contribute to my playgroup success. And it's just been a really valuable experience for me in how I'm doing things. So
that sounds so fun. Can I ask, is it fun? Like, is it like a nice departure from what you were doing?
So I draft Vintage Cube in one of two ways. I'm either drafting like, maybe one of three ways. I'll draft like really good blue decks if they're open, or I'll draft just like Mono White is probably the deck I've drafted the most in any cube, because it's always very easy to assemble and pretty strong consistently. And so I realized I was just falling into a really like kind of a rut, like a very similar draft pattern, because the deck is almost always open in the leagues. And I was like, there has to be more to this. So like, let me put a stipulation on it. And also just the structure of the 64-person events and the feeder leagues is that like it really rewards you for being able to have a good deck a lot of the time, or like a really good deck whenever you get it. So having the open seat really matters. And this is an archetype I don't think I've ever encountered against, like playing against it in the matches I've played or watched. And I haven't seen anyone try to draft. So that like really motivated me. And so it's been really fun to just have like a mission every time I sit down to draft, of being like, okay, if there's a really open deck, I'm probably just going to try to draft it. But in some of these, if my pack is just kind of middling, I want to take picks that are skewing towards cards that usually wind up either undrafted or unplayed, right? Cards like Hogak. The first time I did this, Hogak was just not in the draft. I was like, okay, we'll get Hogak by pack 3. It'll wheel. We didn't get it, and my deck was still very good. Like, it was just a good green-black kind of play-to-the-board creature deck. And that was really satisfying to learn, like, now I'm understanding kind of a pick order for the archetype, what really matters, what kind of packages are good. I still haven't been able to draft all of them and play all of them, but it's changed a lot of how I'm seeing my future drafts, and also being able to pass that on and have my friends who are really trying to compete bird that, knowing that they'll be able to go into drafts, being like, okay, I know that if I wind up in a seat where maybe I'm trying to draft Reanimator, but it's not there, and I, have some of these like survivals and stuff, I can make an engine happen and make a game plan work that does hold up. And so that's just been really, really rewarding.
I love that. I'm going to go next, and I didn't really know which thing to talk about on this Always Improving segment, because, last week I talked about how I was having more fun and the things that I was doing, and there were quite a few things to talk about. But the one that I do want to talk about is kind of something that I think is hard for a lot of Magic players. And that is that I qualified for DC. I could probably go, but I'm not going to, because my wife has Taylor Swift tickets, and the plane tickets to get to the Taylor Swift concert are also extremely high, because, the demand is really high. And, this comes with some other things that I'll talk about in a second. I think that I talked to Mason about this week, and I talked to some other people. I know that Quentin Pierce, my friend, who's also qualified for DC, he's in a similar boat where there's some other stuff going on and he's just not going to go. And I think we force ourselves to feel like we have to go to everything we qualify for or try to qualify for everything and things like that. And, you know, I think that this is a once in a lifetime thing for my wife, and making sure that she's comfortable and happy is more important than anything that Magic would be for me at DC. I was really excited. I've never been to DC before, and it was one that I was really excited to go to. But also, like, I don't know. There will be so many more RCs that I qualify for, and I'm just it's good to be able to just say it's fine. Like, I'll do the next one. Because of that, I have decided to start focusing on limited for a little while. I went and bought the arena draft tokens that are like $50. I think you get quite a bit of them, a bunch of gems, things like that, and have been in the draft queues to kind of practice fundamentals for a little while, attacking and blocking, understanding board states, things like that. And it is so refreshing to kind of leave Pioneer and Modern and Standard and just draft deck. One of the questions that we have in a chat for our live viewers is like, do you enjoy playing your bad decks? And I never just drop from a draft league. I don't know about you, Abe or Mason, but like I will just continue to play it because I only get so many drafts just to being a dad that I want to both see what are the type of decks that are beating these bad decks and also what's going on moving forward. Today I had a 3-3, for example, where I think my deck was probably a 7-0 deck that I didn't mulligan. I all 3 of the games I lost, I kept 2 lands and did not draw another land. And the power of the new mulligan rule says that I should have mulliganed those 2 landers with the hands that I had. You know, I only had 1 to 2 spells to cast and so on and so forth, with a deck full of really powerful rares. And giving myself a chance to draw those really powerful rares is what's right. And it reminds you, it's so easy and constructed because the power level's so high to like not punish you for your bad mulligan decisions, that I think that's the thing that I'm going to focus on limited for this week, is just making good mulligan decisions again and really practicing it.
I love that. I always love hearing people play limited, but I love that especially. So
sorry, that was like kind of 2 things, Abe, and I appreciate your applause, but I think anytime that you have something like what I'm going through, right, where you're like, okay, well, you could go to DC, but it's going to be tight, and you're going to be worried about it, rather than just not doing it and not putting yourself in like an awkward position, is so much better. And then using that opportunity to do something else instead of practice Pioneer is also really cool.
Yeah, no reason throwing good money after bad by just stressing yourself out and adding undue pressure to your life. Magic's something to enjoy. So
that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much to Paul for your Patreon question. I hope we answered it well. We tried to include it in the episode. If you want to join the conversation, head on over to the Patreon Discord by joining the Patreon at $5 or more. I don't say this enough on the show, I've realized from a couple of people. Your invite to the Discord is in your welcome message when you join that Patreon. So, if you join the Patreon $5 or more, you get a welcome message, and it has an invite link in that message. So use that link. You can also join the public Discord where we talk about things like Magic, fantasy football, stuff like that for using the media. You can also leave a YouTube comment. We got quite a few YouTube comments last week that really boosted the show. Like, when I say, like, when you do that, it boosts the show. Our best performing episodes over a week in the last month was last week's episode, where you all left likes, left those YouTube comments, and y'all really love the standard conversation and want more of it. So we will make sure to approach that as we plan our future episodes. You can also follow us on Twitter at CCMTG, or follow us on TikTok at CCMTGpod. Mason, where can people find you?
You can find me over on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can find me this week. I talked with Misplaced Ginger for about an hour 40, right when the BNR went live, talking to him about some stories from the Nadu design, other ones as well. some of the stuff we talked about today on his YouTube channel. So you want to check out Misplaced Ginger on YouTube. We have an hour 40, basically, podcast on that. And you can check me out on TCG Player this week. I wrote about the BNR and have a bunch of deck lists up for for Pioneer and Modern. So check me out there. Abe, what about you?
You can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. All of my coaching availability between now and the RC has filled up, but if you're interested in setting up coaching with me, feel free to just shoot me a DM on Twitter or an email over at morenothings@gmail.com and just put coaching in the description. Spencer, how about you?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, you can follow me at Easy Game on Twitter. You can find me every week on the Neat Nerd podcast, as well as at Spencer13Easy on TikTok. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. Mason, it was so nice to have you back. I appreciated your passion this week, and I just wanted to publicly say that on the episode. So we'll see everybody next week for another episode of Constructed Criticism.